Hello and welcome to what is the fifth and final podcast in our series. Today we're going to be covering budgeting for security, financial planning for cyber compliance. Very, very interesting and relevant topic at the moment. Today I'm joined by our two guest speakers, Martin Wilson and Wendy Pattison. Martin, quick intro, please, sir.
Yeah, hello everybody. So Martin Wilson, Serving Police Officer, Detective Inspector from the Northeast, and I work in one of the cyber resilience centres here in the Northeast that covers the three Northeast police forces and the Yorkshire forces, and basically we are here to help small organisations and schools become more cyber secure.
Thank you. And Wendy?
Hi everybody, my name is Wendy Pattison. I am the CFO and Business Director of Framwellgate School, Durham. My school, Fram, unfortunately suffered quite a significant, serious cyber attack and data breach back in September, and that's how I'm now working with Martin, doing outreach work, and with Ed, basically trying to help people learn from our mistakes and look at how we can make the world a safer place.
And guys, the importance of the content here shouldn't be lost on anyone. This is a real life situation. Wendy's gone through all of the pain from front to back, and this series is designed for you guys to basically learn from some of the good things and the bad things that were done during that, to help you hopefully avoid them, step around them, deal with them in the best possible way when they arise. And that's been the underriding, one of the kind of underpins to this series is it's not when, it's not if, sorry, it's when. It is highly likely, just based on the metrics that we see at Acronis, that you're going to be hit by some kind of attack, whether that be internal or external. Okay, so look, Wendy, thank you again we're very lucky to have you here. And I know you've gone to great lengths preparing some slides for us to kind of help us work through them. And those are for the audience as well, guys. We will be sharing these afterwards, but these are put up on the screen to help you guys and guide you through as we have this conversation. So let's just dive straight in. Wendy, where would you like to start?
No problem. Start at the very beginning. Really, the message I want to get across here today is that we're all in this together in the education sector, and it is exactly as Ed said there. It's a case of not if, but when. It will happen to some of us. It'll happen to some of us maybe more than once if we're unlucky. But it's how we can work together to help try and plan for the worst, hope for the best, and be in a better place. In relation to budgets kind of underpin everything we do in schools. Without the budget, without the money, we wouldn't be able to teach the kids, we wouldn't be able to keep the kids safe. And it's where you put the money. It's where you put the money best placed to make sure that your priorities are funded. And one of the priorities now these days very much is supporting your risk management plan, and cybersecurity and cybercrime is right up at the top of that list for many, many organisations, schools being one of them. Schools and academies are funded in exactly the same way. It comes through the same funding formula. It just comes from a different place. But at the end of the day, it's exactly the same amount of money that you will get. It is driven in the main by student numbers now. 85+% of your money comes through bums on seats in your school. So the number of kids who come in will drive that funding for your school. So the smaller schools will have less money, the bigger schools will have more money, in simple terms. We have a huge range of schools and organisations within the sector. Some are tiny, your small infant schools, your small nursery schools, small primaries, and you'll have your bigger standalone secondary schools, and you'll have your bigger, huge multi-academy trusts, upwards sometimes of 90 schools. So the funding within each school is going to be a very different landscape for that individual organisation or collective organisation in a trust. And therefore everybody's placed in a different way to manage this risk and to be able to put money to one side from their budget. How much money you're going to have available will be less in those smaller organisations. So it's not a level playing field by any means. And this is no panacea as to how to actually fix the problem for anybody. But hopefully I'll try and impart some of my knowledge and experience from the education sector to give some good ideas, hopefully, which might then help you to mitigate the risks of cybercrime. So cybercrime doesn't discriminate. It will hit somebody, it will hit an organisation. And a very strong lesson that Martin told me when we were hit back in September was, don't take this personally. This is not you. This is not your school that's been targeted. It is a known vulnerability that's been targeted. And therefore, vulnerabilities are going to be in every one of those schools within that sector that I've talked about there, from your smaller primaries, infants, nurseries, right the way through to your big multi-academy trusts. Those vulnerabilities will be there. So we're all potentially a victim. We're all very, very vulnerable, but it's then what we do about that now. So when we look at budgeting, budgets should support your risk management plan, your school improvement plan, and your key priorities. How do you know what those priorities are? And they will be pulled from a number of sectors. So you'll have your Ofsted priority, you'll have your attainment priority for your kids, you'll have your Progress 8 priority. You will also have your risk priorities. So what are the risks in your school that are not insured? And, you know, reputational damage being one of them. So your risk plan, and we have a separate webinar, we've talked about risk. Your risk plan will look at all of those other areas. And your budget needs to be able to support all of those areas and show what you're doing. There is a cost of failure. And the cost of failure, or reactivity as I call it, is far greater than the cost of proactivity. I know that from our experience here. So if we had done something such as an annual vulnerability assessment and funded that and costed that at the start of the year, the good guys would have found the vulnerabilities in our network before the bad guys, who then tried to get money out of us. And, you know, there was a significant cost to our organisation because we were attacked and because technically we failed. So it's really thinking and turning that on its head. How can we stop ourselves failing? What money do I need to do that? Now, budgets in the academy sector and the maintained sector, yes, it's the same amount of money, but it's over a different period of time. So your planning processes will be different. So in academies, it matches the academic year, which is September to August. And in mainstream provision, maintained schools, it is April to March. So your budget planning will be at different times across the year, which means your trust board and your governor meetings will be at different times across the year, considering your plans, what your risks are, and where you're going to put your money. Ultimately, your trust board and your governing boards will be agreeing your budgets and signing that off. So you need to be able to go to them with really clear, detailed plans to say, these are the risks here, and therefore these are our priorities here. And the cost of failure is this. Let's look at the cost of proactivity, and this is what I think. This is where this needs to sit. So start planning as early as you can. Talk to the right people, talk to your trustees, your senior leaders, your governors, get those people on board and get them to understand what the real risk is to you and that cost. An annual vulnerability assessment I've touched on there. This will really help you achieve an awful lot with very little work for you. So somebody like Martin's team with NEBRC, the good guys, they came in and did the annual vulnerability assessment on me because I was being reactive to the incident that we had. Knowing what I know now, hindsight's a wonderful thing. I would have done that vulnerability assessment, something I'd never even heard of. I would have done that a year ago, because then this wouldn't have happened to us. And what I will absolutely make sure of now is that that money will be built into our budget now, year on year on year. It's a non-negotiable. We'll get that agreed through trustees, and that will really help to knock that risk level right back down again, and hopefully in the long run save us money.
From a vulnerability assessment level, Wendy, would you agree that not only the network we need to be looking at, but it's things like the software within the environment as well? And, you know, one of the things that gets overlooked that we see a lot is the patching environments, and that seems to be one of the key areas that these threat actors take advantage of. How often, what changes have you had to kind of put in place just to continuously do these assessments? Are you doing them more than than once a year? Are you looking at the patching on a more regular basis now, would you say?
Network managers looking at patching on a regular basis. The annual vulnerability assessment, I would suggest if you are proactive, it annually would be enough. If you've had to do it as a reactive response, then it might well be that I do my next one, quite quickly to start the ball rolling again, just to almost assess. When Martin did the work and when our other agents came in after the event and did a more intrusive look, we got 2 reports, which were RAG rated, looking at priorities. You go through that and you kind of, you're doing what you can when you can, you're fixing problems that are there, you're plugging gaps. But then the landscape changes, the threat landscape changes, new vulnerabilities will arise. How do we know that they haven't come about as well? So I think it's important to almost, yes, do that reassessment when you've had an attack, do it relatively quickly to make sure that you have gone through those priorities, but then get into a cycle of at least once a year to get that done.
Yeah, thank you. Martin, from obviously the work you guys do, you go into schools and you do these assessments, are you finding common threads between the schools in terms of the way they're being exploited, or the gaps, the vulnerabilities that they have?
Absolutely. I mean, we go into some schools or academies and we find very little, which is good. And the value of these vulnerability assessments is it's like independent assurance. Someone that's not connected to you or your networks, basically having a look and giving you a report. So actually finding nothing's or very little is a good thing as well. So I have to say that, not all of the educational sector is in a place where they're really vulnerable. Some for whatever reason, whether it's because they've learned the lessons through failure or whatever it may be, are in a really good place. Those that are maybe not, yeah, absolutely, it's common themes. It tends to be on when I talk about internal and external environments. So you've got the internet up to the firewall, so we're calling that external. Sometimes we'll find vulnerabilities there, but obviously they're the critical ones because they can be accessed and exploited across the internet. More often than not, we find a lot of issues in the internal environment, probably because there's a school of thought, well, twofold. There's a school of thought that says, I know the internet can be bad, therefore I need to make sure my perimeter security is really, really good, and I'm therefore less concerned about internal. The problem with that is twofold. I'm not saying that all students and pupils are like this, but you've got lots of maybe curious, technically gifted students that might want to change the homework marks or create a little bit of mischief on the internal environment. So they're inside at that point. So there's that risk. And also as well, things like photocopiers tend to be provided by the photocopying company, maybe not directly managed by the IT manager, but yet connected into that network. And it's understanding, typically it's a default password, to be honest, which then can get you access to the printer, which then you may say, well, what do you get from there? Well, actually, you can perhaps see what staff are in a certain department, what's being printed, or depending on what that printer looks like, maybe you can connect to the network through the internal environment. So, sorry, Ed, yeah, a little bit longer than what I intended, but it very much tends to be the same sort of issues.
Yeah. And we're seeing that at Acronis as well, by the way, for the schools that we engage with and the partners that we talk to. Everything that you guys is saying resonates from our side as well. Wendy, do you want to say it, or can I say next slide? Who wants to say it?
Go on then, Ed. I know you're dying to.
Next slide, please.
So I think when we talk about budgeting and costs, I think what we need to be mindful of is what are the hidden costs of failure. If we don't do what we should be doing, if we are blissfully ignorant and think everything's fine, what are the real risks and what are the associated costs with that? Reputational damage for me, number one. We've got 1,300 kids here. We've therefore got potentially 2,600 parents. You've got a huge school community. You've got your staffing. It's the fallout, and potentially one of the biggest things that Martin and I talked about when this happened to us and when there was a data breach is how do we manage this? Because we have to tell people about a data breach, but then what could the backlash be? And it's a bit like if you have a poor Ofsted in a school, there's a risk from reputational damage, and you lose the kids. And like I said before, funding is based on bums on seats. The vast majority of your funding comes through the number of kids you have in your school. If parents start taking children out because they think the school is failing for whatever reason, or the kids aren't safe because of an event like this, then you will lose money. It does therefore have a significant financial downturn on the school, which you don't want. There's also risks of student harm. So again, you close the school. How do you know that the school is safe? And if there's a data breach with student data, which we had, what is the potential and when in the future for some of those students or parents to be targeted from that data breach? So that is a potential very serious hidden cost. There are sanctions that the ICO can impart onto schools. To this date, I'm fairly certain that none has ever yet been given a fine, but that's not to say that they couldn't. And that is potentially, therefore, also a highly significant financial cost if it ever did happen. Have you got inadequate insurance? Have you got insurance at all? And is the insurance fit for purpose for you? For us, we were through RPA, risk protection arrangement, through the DFE, but they were unable to cover us because we didn't use their loss adjuster to do the work, basically because they couldn't come in time and support us. So we made a calculated decision to keep school only down for a day because we managed to get another company who could come in and do that work brilliantly, quickly, scaffold us in a much quicker and better way than was being offered by the DFE. So, but that is a risk, that is a cost, and it cost us at the end of the day, which money that we couldn't get back. Staff time, that is a hidden cost. I was working pretty much around the clock. Martin wasn't working around the clock for us. Staff in school were working around the clock, trustees were involved. That's huge. That's a huge cost. If you really calculated it out, it's tens of thousands of pounds. There's a risk as well. So if the DFE aren't happy with how it's come about, or if the local authority aren't happy with the mainstream school as to how this has come about, there are sanctions that can be taken against schools. In an academy, you get something called a notice to improve. It's not nice. And you therefore have hoops to jump through regularly to try and get yourself back up to, being top of the class. Similarly, the local authority can withdraw delegation of funding to mainstream schools. And it does happen. I've seen it happen. So that is a risk. And is it worth the risk? I've put on here, failure is the greatest teacher. I think that's something that Martin said to me. And also, if you haven't failed yet, well, learn from those who have. So learn from people like us who, have made mistakes or haven't, made mistakes on purpose, but through ignorance have. Learn from that, and how can we help each other to get through such incidents and prevent them happening in the first place? We've all got an opportunity to learn and to help each other and to invest and protect ourselves, and that's where your budget comes in. So people in the audience now might not have any impact on budgeting or any say in strategic financial management, but people in your organisation do. So talk to them, make sure that they understand what the risk is and what the potential cost to you is, including those hidden costs. Attend training. So make sure that the right people are trained, and I really include your governors and trustees in that. I go back to this every time. They are ultimately the responsible people. They are the unpaid responsible people, but that's the system we have. We are here to advise and guide them, but also ask for their support. So to advise and guide them, they need to understand in a better way. Therefore, they may well need training. So make sure that that's an investment made as well. Training to them and staff. Even when we're proactive, there's still a risk of falling victim. Of course there is. And I mean, no doubt that this could happen to us again, because it is a changing landscape. But plan ahead, really think, plan ahead, and plan for failure as well. So plan to protect, but plan for failure. And that might well be that if you're in a lucky enough position to have reserves, or you're in a bigger trust that has reserves, you have almost a contingency pot that you can call upon to pull from that pot, get trustees to agree that, and at least you've got kind of an insurance in case you can't get insurance, if you know what I mean. Don't know if you want to add anything to that, Martin or Ed.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't do Wendy's role or any role really that sets budgets as such, but I do have conversations with lots of people that do, and other cybersecurity professionals. And I guess what this all comes down to is what kind of percentage of my total budget should I spend on cybersecurity, and that'll vary from context to context. You speak to some quite wealthy small businesses that maybe might only employ a couple of people, but actually have some really valuable intellectual property. So how much is your IP worth? Well, it's worth £1 million. Maybe 5% of that. You might not need to spend all of that, but start to think of what percentage of your budget could be allocated to this, and do that commensurate with your risks. And ultimately, remember that, okay, some of this may be aspirational, some of it may be out of reach, but again, without sounding like a broken record, be aware of those free and subsidized resources that are out there. But I think what's really, really key when you are trying to maybe unlock some internal challenges around budgets is being able to determine the return on investment. If I am going to spend 5% of my budget on something, what's the return on investment on that? Which is easy to say, difficult to do, because how do you sell a drama-free day? How do you know that nothing's happened? Well, maybe start to look at some of the logs, show through as a result of the security that you've put in, what it's prevented. Even one of these incidents is probably going to pay for that budget on its own in that 1 year. Start to look at, you should be recording them anyway, the number of security incidents that you're having, and maybe they may reduce. It's all about being able to put maybe some numbers on some metrics, because as I understand it, when it boils down to it, you've got not enough money to make decisions. It's then at that point how you make those decisions and being able to justify it. So it's that return on investment's really, really important.
And for me, the reputational damage is the big one, right? There's knowns and there's unknowns. There's bits you can measure with reputational damage, and there's bits that are almost incredibly, you just can't measure them, right? They come out over time. But the one thing that you mentioned there, Wendy, which will hit you pretty quickly in the face, is the amount of students that drop out on the back of one of these incidents. So it's all about, as Wendy said, all the way through is being proactive, is getting ahead. There's organizations out there who have bomb scares on a fairly regular basis, but you don't hear it in the news because they have looked at those risk factors and they've built teams around that to kind of withhold information from the public sphere. It's a little bit more difficult within a school environment because you've got a lot of parents that all know each other, and it's all community based. So it's actually probably slightly more important for the education sector to mitigate the reputational damage, because it can be impossible to get back once it's gone.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll let you say it for the last one, Wendy.
Oh, it's sad. The last slide. Next slide, please. So just from my perspective, not me telling anybody how to do their jobs, but me just offering some suggestions from my experience and what I've learned. Obtain that independent assessment of your network. Relatively low cost proactive approach. And it's not necessarily just using a vulnerability assessment, but look at your internal auditor, who you already pay for. See if your internal auditor could come in and shed a different set of eyes on your processes and your systems and your business continuity plan. We certainly do that here. And anybody who can do it for you, it's not a bad thing. Get that assessment done. That will tell you where your gaps are. And it's like I said before, the good guys will find those gaps and the vulnerabilities before the bad guys. So that can only be a good thing. And it's a relatively low cost approach. Find the money now for this. So mainstream schools now are at the start of their financial year. 1st of April was just gone. So, you might have a bit of a contingency within your budget now if you are a mainstream school. Repurpose your funds early if you can. Just get a bit of that money out of your budget. Take it from your IT budget if you can, or somewhere else if you need to. Academies look for savings made throughout the year. We are now heading towards year end of August. We're leaving in 7 weeks. So the vast majority of spend will be done in the next 7 weeks. So now is when you find out if you've got some savings. So maybe just ring fence those savings, carry them forward to next year and do a quick early vulnerability assessment, get that in place, get that funded. So that's why, you know, the budget line, the timeline is very different for both schools, both sectors. However, there are opportunities at any point in time in the year to repurpose and move funds around, especially when the risk is so great and growing. Build into the budget your annual recheck, or more regularly if it's something that you need to do, like we talked about. Take money from you within your ICT budget if you can, because, you know, we put money away for ICT. We are lucky we're a bigger school, we can. Other schools might not be able to do that. But look at where those surplus areas are in your budget and see if you can repurpose those funds. And, you know, it is important to try and do that. If you suffer an attack, the amount you'll be spending anyway will be blown out the water, and you find that money. You do find it because you haven't got a choice. So find it now to a lot lesser extent. That's, you know, a big bit of advice from me today, really.
Would you say that's 10 times more than what would you say is a kind of ratio, Wendy?
It could be 10 times more, could be 20 times more, could be more than that. It depends on what the overall impact is, but also the hidden costs that we might not know about yet, so that they are hard to measure. But yeah, in real terms, yeah, 5-10 times more. Yeah, most definitely. Make your trustees and your governors take note, be honest with them about what's happening, be honest about your environment. If you think work is needed to be done, don't hide from it, tell them. You know, you are one person in the big chain, you know, of whole decisions that are going to be made. Trustees and governors have to take responsibility for that. So be honest with them, share the information with them, and ask them to put money to one side and somehow support you in how they set and ratify the final budget. Minute those actions, because if the worst does happen, you need the evidence that they've taken it, you know, responsibly, that they've made that decision, that they're going to support you, and you can pass that to the Information Commissioner's Office if they ask for evidence, or the DFE if they ask for evidence, which they will do. And they asked us for evidence of such things. Make sure you reflect on your business plan, your business continuity plan, and how you manage without a network. Do you need to put money to one side to help you do that? Do you need to print off a number of documents now and keep them secure in case you've got no network at some point with the kids' details on, etc.? Because if you haven't got your network, you might not be able to contact those kids and know that they're safe. So making sure you can do that probably will have a cost implication. Have you thought about cloud-based solutions for things like your MIS system? Because theoretically, that is more secure. So what is the cost of that? It would be a cost. We're considering that now, and we would have to find thousands of pounds to do that, but it is something we are seriously considering. So everything comes back to finance in my world, but finance is my baby. Finance is my passion. That's why I'm quite sad. But does come back to finance. And I suppose key takeaway for me today is help your budget help you, let your budget help you, but you need to talk to people to allow that to happen and get support from your trust and governors.
Thank you, Wendy. Martin, is there anything you'd like to add to that, mate?
Yeah, just to reiterate, really, when you are finding budgetary challenges, it's that return on investment. So without going over it all again, understand what the value of this stuff is, both tangibly and intangibly, and weave that into your budget, weave that into your conversation with your senior decision makers. Because I think you've got a person on this call who's got lived experience. And one of the things that Wendy's quite clearly saying throughout this series of webinars, and in fact, as long as I've known her, is that I wish I'd have known about the cost of the vulnerability assessments and stuff and how little it was and what it could have saved me. So start to have these sorts of proactive conversations.
That's brilliant. I think, look, guys, in terms of the audience, it's being proactive. It's understand the vulnerabilities. It's better to put your hand up and go to the trustees and the board members with a challenge that they can help you solve before a real challenge arises and you get hit by an event, at which point it makes everything a little bit more difficult, Wendy, I suspect, in terms of requesting last minute budget and trying to find finances from places, nooks and crannies, back of the SETI, things like that. Better to just be open and honest, put your hands up. I admit that there's some challenges that need overcoming. There's lots of people out there, including the people on this call, who will be able to support you through those challenges and be proactive before the event actually occurs, and then obviously makes things a lot more difficult. I'm conscious of time again, guys. These seem to go really quickly. And the same question as I always ask you at the end. What would be the one, Wendy, and I'll start with you, what would be the one message? There's a lot of content in here, but how would you boil that down into just one single message for the guys to take away?
Talk to the right people within your organisation and help them understand the level of risk and what that might cost the organisation, the cost of proactivity versus the cost of reactivity, and concentrate as well on the hidden costs, which not many people will necessarily think about, things like reputational damage. If you don't get it right and you don't be proactive and fund that proactivity, then when the worst happens, you could be in a much worse place.
Martin, I'll leave you with the closing words. You're on mute.
Have a plan, have a paper plan, have an idea around, if it does all go a bit pear-shaped, what it is you're going to do, who you're going to speak to, and in what order. Because when something like this happens, just having some structure to what will be a really chaotic and stressful time. So having a plan can really reap dividends for you.
And from my perspective, guys, obviously Acronis are well aligned at a portfolio level to deal with all of these challenges that we're describing throughout. One of the things that we talked about is time available and the amount of manual intervention that has to take place in IT. One of the things, one of the overarching themes within Acronis is automation, and a lot of these things that we've been talking about, the technical controls that can help mitigate and get you out of these, can pretty much be automated. So the amount of manual intervention going on that allows you guys to get on with the policies and the talking to people and the things that you need to be dealing with, where the software will automate and deal with a lot and take a lot of these elements of risk away from you. And with that, we will finish up. That's the final podcast in the series. Thanks to everybody for attending, listening, staying awake. Wendy, Martin, thank you so much for your time, your input, and I'm sure the guys will get a lot of value from your words today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.